A reading from the first letter of Paul to the Corinthians. I am reminding you, brothers and sisters, of the gospel I preached to you, which you indeed received and in which you also stand. Through it you are also being saved, if you hold fast to the word I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. For I handed on to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins, in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day, in accordance with the Scriptures, that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. After that, Christ appeared to more than 500 brothers at once, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. After that, he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Last of all, as to one born abnormally, he appeared to me. For I am the least of the apostles, not fit to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace to me has not been ineffective. Indeed, I have toiled harder than all of them. Not I, however, but the grace of God that is with me. Therefore, whether it be I or they, so we preach, and so you believed. The word of the Lord.
Our second reading comes from the first letter of Paul to the Corinthians. So in the first reading, we have the prophet Isaiah being called to be a missionary. He heard the question of God, whom shall I send? I need someone whom I can send. And after experiencing God's graciousness, the graciousness that makes him cleansed of his sins, then Isaiah now moves into availability to be sent by God, away from his sense of unworthiness to the sense of obedience. I can be sent. And here in the second reading, we have another missionary, a person called by God to be sent, Paul, whom the tradition of the church refers to as the apostle, the missionary, the one sent. But in the description of himself presented by St. Paul in the first letter to the Corinthians, he is very much like Isaiah. He says, as though he's marveling when he recalls his calling, he says, you know, I am the least of the apostles. In fact, in terms of time, he was the last to be called. And the risen Lord has already appeared to so many, beginning with his original companions. And towards the end, just like Isaiah, Paul was granted a vision, a revelation of the risen Lord. And he considers himself the last of those to whom the risen Lord has granted. And St. Paul considers himself the last of those to whom God has granted this particular grace of the revelation of the risen Lord. But then he also says that he is the least of the apostles, not only in terms of time and stature, but also because he did not deserve it. He even persecuted the church. So how could someone who did harm to the church in a systematic manner become its apostle? How could someone who tried to destroy the followers of the risen Christ be the apostle of the risen Christ? So St. Paul will say, in fact, if you look at those who have been sent, I am the most unworthy. But how did this happen? St. Paul points to only one reason. It is by God's favor. that I am what I am. It is not my worthiness. In fact, I have nothing to boast if the criterion is worthiness. The only thing that I can boast of is God has been gracious. God saw something in me, and I am holding on to that favor that God has granted to such an unworthy servant. And the beautiful thing, St. Paul does not waste the grace and favor granted to him by God. He lives by that grace, and he claims that by being a missioner of this gracious Lord, his mission has not been left fruitless. In fact, he has worked hard, harder than the other apostles. Just like Isaiah, St. Paul is an image of someone totally aware of his unworthiness before God and before the calling of God. But look at the shift. It's not anymore my unworthiness. It is God's calling. It is God's favor that will operate in my life. It is God's grace that will make my mission possible and fruitful in my own unworthiness. Remember in the second letter of Paul to the Corinthians, chapter 12, Paul talks about a thorn in the flesh, whatever that was. And he said he has begged the Lord a number of times to remove that thorn. And the response of the Lord is, "My grace is sufficient for you." That has been a cardinal rule for the missionary life of St. Paul. I am appealing to you, dear brothers and sisters, ordained, non-ordained. We are all called to mission. I know we are all shrinking due to unworthiness before this noble calling. But like St. Paul, let us be attentive to the graciousness of God. And like Isaiah, let us be prompt in obeying the voice when the voice asks, "Whom shall I send?"